Hello, my name is Jason Ankin and this is my vlog channel. I decided I was going to do a video today. Instead of walking about, I was going to do one sitting at my desk. And I just thought of this just there now. I was sort of thinking about how I was going to what I was going to talk about for the vlog. And I thought I would just talk about how I got into philosophy and sort of like studying different spiritual systems and where that all began and where I am right now. So yes, how I actually got into philosophy was a little bit unusual. It wasn't typical. I used to play this computer game on the PS2, and it was called Tomb Raider. You might have heard of this game before. It's the game was specifically Tomb Raider Anniversary, and basically the theme of this game was a mythology theme, and it was Arthurian, so it was like King Arthur and stuff like that. And the idea was you went around the game and you had to collect pieces of a sword, and then at the end you had Excalibur and you fought the baddie at the end. But what was really cool about the game is that all the way throughout the game there was these little mythological puzzles, and I learned a little bit about mythology, and I became very attracted to that because it was really unusual, and I just like sort of odd, unusual things. And for some reason, this game stimulated my desire to start researching mythology, which then led to studying philosophy. So yes, right now I'm 30 years old. So when I first started reading books on world mythology, I was 20 years old. I read my first mythology book during the summer between my first year of college. I was doing sports studies, and between year one and year two, during that summer was the year that I started reading books on world religion. And now, this is a weird thing, I'd never really read books previous to that, so I pretty much dived into the most, you could say the best literary works in the world from the start. And I remember I went to the library and I got this one book. It was called The World of Myth, and it was just sort of it was just a book talking about all the different types of myths that existed and the common themes that you could find in different mythologies. And this is something that I continued to do. I read similar books after this, again just books on sort of generalized world mythology. And very early on, it's interesting because I'm not really, at the time I was atheist, so I wasn't really interested. I wasn't like a believer in God or anything. The only reason I was reading these religious books was because I was interested in the stories. It was like, these books have lasted so long, there must be something to them that the majority of people are missing. And I was kind of brought up Christian. I was growing up in a Christian country, and within Christianity, for example, in the Ten Commandments, it says, one of the Ten Commandments I think is, do not take other gods before me, or whatever. And that's indirectly saying, don't study other religions. This is the one religion that you need to study. So because I was an atheist, that gave me, I didn't have to uphold that commandment, if you will. So then I was able to then freely explore different world mythologies. So yeah, around that exact same time, I started reading books on philosophy as well. The very first book that I read was a book called The History of Philosophy. And it was just literally a book showing the chronological movement of sort of different philosophers throughout history, starting with like Socrates and then moving all the way to the modern age. And then eventually that got me into psychology as well, so I became much more interested in sort of the subjective side of things through my own personal study. Whereas when I was in college and school, I was studying the body and I was studying sports and fitness. And it was only a couple of years later that I decided I was looking to switch away from physical fitness to mental performance, because I became so much more interested in it in my personal life, that I realized that I could link my career and my personal interests together through mental training. But yeah, it was, like I said, I would just read these stories, like world mythology stories. I was just very curious. At the time I was atheist. Right now I'm probably more agnostic. Not more agnostic, I'm very agnostic. I honestly don't have a clue. I've been both. I've been a believer, I've been a non-believer or whatever. But right now I'm 100% certain that I don't have a clue whether there's a God or not, so I don't even get into the debate anymore. But yeah, over a number of years of reading various mythology books, I started to notice patterns began to emerge, and I began to realize that all religions, at their core, are very, very similar. And this is again a contradiction to the mainstream idea that each religion is different. At its core, it's not. In fact, all of them are more similar at their core than they are different. And I could explain this, it just makes perfect sense. I mean, we know this thing called evolution, the theory of evolution. And at one point in our history, all of humanity, all of the human species was concentrated into one point in Africa. We've been able to trace this backwards to that point, and we're pretty certain that that's the case. So why wouldn't that apply also to religion? Because no matter what part of the world you go to, or no matter what culture you go into, you always find that they have a religion. So hypothetically speaking, 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, would people have been practicing, sort of rudimentary religions and rudimentary spiritual practices? Highly likely. So what that meant that when all humans were concentrated into a single point, in all likelihood their spiritual systems were probably more similar than different. But it's just when humans started to migrate outwards, like for example, they went up into the Middle East, and then they went into Asia and the Americas and into parts of Europe. What they would have done is they would have took their little fragment of their spiritual system and their little spiritual principles, and they would have migrated around the world. And basically when they had settled, over time they would develop their own culture, and basically that would create cultural layers upon top of their original religion, if that makes sense. So what you find is when you look at all the different world religions, you realize that yes, culturally on the surface they look different, but at their foundation they're all the same, because in all likelihood a lot of the original spiritual principles that we still recognize today probably were discovered tens of thousands of years ago. So yes, when I actually discovered this, when I started to realize that there's something deeper at the core to all of these spiritual systems, it got me. This happened around about the age of 26 years old or so. So there's about maybe 6 years of studying different mythologies and stuff like that, and studying philosophy and psychology alongside it. But yeah, around about 26 years old, I really started to see the interconnectedness as opposed to the separateness. And I think there's actually a term for this. It's called syncretism. So syncretism is the idea that all religions are essentially just fragments of one whole religion. I think there's even a book, a really, really famous book called The Holy Science. I have not read this book. It was written by a Hindu or an Indian man or something. But that book, The Holy Science, I haven't got it. I would like to get it. But I've kind of researched what it means. There's a Wikipedia for it. But that also, illustrates the idea that at their core there is this one religion or whatever. And all of this sort of fighting between different religions is just based upon ignorance, essentially. But yeah, once I discovered this actually completely took my exploration in a different angle, and I started studying what's called esotericism. So esotericism is basically, like for example, if you have a mythology and you've got the plain story in front of you, if you were to take this story literally, like for example, some people take the Bible literally, this you're referred to as an exotericist, someone who takes the literal truth of what's being said in the Bible as actually happening in reality. Whereas if you're an esotericist is somebody who sees that there's a deep underlying meaning to the story, and it's more symbolic than realistic, if that makes sense. So when I started studying, when I found this out, the similarities between different religious systems, I became much more interested in studying this concept called esotericism. And this can get very weird and very wonderful, because it takes you into sort of studying things like mysticism. It takes you into studying things like the occult. It takes you into studying things like different spiritual systems, maybe from the East, things like Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, stuff like that, because things like alchemy, astrology, all of these interesting sort of esoteric philosophies. So it was kind of like a massive wake-up call. I'll probably explain more about what actually occurred at that point when I made this discovery in another video at some point, because that in itself is a whole thing. But I'll just continue talking more about philosophy and stuff. After I made this discovery, right about the age of 26, I kind of started immersing myself into studying various mystical systems and stuff like that. So I became really interested in a philosophy called Taoism. I also became interested in a philosophy called Hermeticism, and also things like mental science, Buddhism, and I became much more interested in stuff like personal development as well. So what I realized, the thing that's different to just reading books on like world mythology in comparison to studying things like esotericism and mysticism and stuff like that, is that mystical practices are much more they're practices. Fundamentally, that's what they are. They're methodologies for attaining certain spiritual states or certain spiritual goals or spiritual objectives. Like for example, in Taoism, the objective is to become more harmoniously aligned with the Tao. So the Tao is the sort of universal law behind all of the universe, that sort of is the source of everything that exists. And the idea behind Taoism is that you uphold virtue, and by becoming more virtuous, you become more harmoniously aligned with the Tao, and then therefore you live a much more, happier, healthier, fulfilling life, etc. Whereas Buddhism is like about overcoming suffering, so it's about cultivating wisdom to overcome attachment. Hermetic philosophy is more similar to mental science, where it's about manifesting your own reality and sort of using things like visualization, using things like prayer to sort of try and change your life, basically. You might have heard of something called the law of attraction. So the law of attraction is a part of mental science. So that's one of the shifts that occurred in me. I moved away from the idea that mythology was just stories, and I got to the point of where these spiritual systems were actually practices that you actually uphold. So essentially the idea behind most of these is that they're all really, if I'm to undermine it and bring it down to its fundamental level, these are systems to improve your life, basically. A lot of them talk about, afterlife and rebirth and going to heaven and stuff like that. But again, these are topics that we don't really understand, we don't really know. It seems more relevant to your life on a day-to-day basis. So they're all just forms of highly sophisticated, ancient forms of personal development in a way. And some people might not want to hear that. I'm trying to bring it down to the fundamentals and trying to sort of talk about it in terms that's understandable. all of the systems are essentially just about that, making you a better individual. Now, what's really interesting is a lot of these systems are effective. They've worked throughout centuries, and you learn so many deep truths about them that you actually do become, you want to actually practice them. And I've actually been practicing a number of them over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. And let's get into that. So yes, over the last 3 or 4 years or so, I've been playing about with different spiritual systems, mystical systems, if you want to call them that. And the main ones I was working with are Taoism, Buddhism, what's called mental science, and also Hermeticism. When I first started getting into esoteric systems, I started out with like basic stuff. Like, have you ever heard of a thing? You might have heard of a thing called the law of attraction, and it's really about visualization and manifesting the life of your dreams. And I had fun with that as well. So yeah, that was something that I experiment with in the early stages. Then I started to become a bit more serious, and I became interested in things like Taoist philosophy, and I also became interested in things like Hermeticism. You might not have heard of Hermeticism before, but it's like a Greco-Egyptian, Greco being Greek, so it's a Greek/Egyptian ancient sort of mystical system. And I've practiced a few different books, and there are various different practices. I've dabbled about with those, and you might have watched a video of mine that I talked about my experience with Taoism, and I was talking in that video. In fact, I'll put a link up here in the corner. You might have seen in that video that I was talking about that I was going to start doing more videos about Taoism. However, when I was studying into Taoism, I realized that I was using a lot of Buddhist information to support Taoism, because a lot of the Taoist stuff hasn't been translated into English, whereas a lot of the Buddhist stuff has. In fact, you can pretty much get the whole Buddhist religion translated into English. So I started to realize, why am I studying Taoism? I should be studying Buddhism, because it's got everything translated, and it's very clear, and it seems to be the best. Out of all the philosophies that I've studied so far, I haven't studied anything as comprehensive and as complete and as straightforward as Buddhism, and as clear as Buddhism. Although the sort of objective, I'm again, the objective of Buddhism is to overcome suffering and to attain nirvana, which is basically like an eternal state of bliss or whatever. So I don't really understand what that means, to be honest, because I don't think you can overcome suffering fully, and to do all of that training just to attain a single state of bliss. However, skeptical as I am, I have started practicing it just recently, over the last couple of weeks, and I've been reading this one book, and this has been my little my little guidebook. It's called The Noble Eightfold Path, The Way to the End of Suffering by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And this book is very concise. It's about 130 or 40 pages long, and it just explains the Eightfold Path in very simple, fundamental terms. So yeah, the Eightfold Path in Buddhism is broken up into 3 parts. 3 parts is the morality training, the concentration training, and the training of wisdom. So to start off with, ideally what you need to do is basically you need to develop a moral foundation. And the way that you do that is by upholding what's called the Buddhist precepts. The Buddhist precepts, there's the 5 main precepts of Buddhism are abstaining from killing, abstaining from stealing, abstaining from sexual misconduct, or this is referred to as adultery, so not like if someone's married, you're not allowed to sleep with them or whatever. Abstaining from lying, and then finally abstaining from the taking of intoxicants. Now, these are the fundamentals. And then the final one, abstain from the taking of intoxicants, is preventative, meaning that taking intoxicants can lead to you breaking the first four, basically. But alongside that, because I'm not a Buddhist monk, the Buddhist, within Buddhism, they have this code. It's called the Layman's Code of Discipline, or the Buddhist Layman's Code of Discipline. And basically, I'm beginning to practice that code. I'm currently studying the first discourse. Within the Layman's Code of Discipline, there's 4 discourses. Right now, I'm studying and aiming to uphold the first discourse. But that gets your behavior and your conduct, positively aligned. It's really interesting. It's probably something I'll have to do a video on in the future. And I'm also beginning to practice these certain types of meditation called the 4 sublime states. And these are the states of mind. Sometimes they're called the 4 sublime abides. And the reason why they're called abides is because you want to be in these states continuously all of the time. And they are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and tranquility. So this is what I'm practicing right now, and I'm enjoying it. It's really good. So you can see the evolution over time, how long this has taken me to actually get here. I started out, I was playing this computer game, and then that got me into mythology, and then I started studying all the world mythologies. Then over time, I eventually began to realize the interconnectedness of all of the various religious systems. I started to understand at their core, they were all esoteric, and all the fundamental principles of every spiritual system is pretty much the same. And then I started to realize and started to dabble about with different esoteric systems, different mystical systems. And eventually I've come to the conclusion that Buddhism seems to be the best one, and that's why I'm practicing it. I still have a real interest in Taoism, and I still have an interest in Hermetic philosophy, and still have an interest in mental science. So I'm still studying those, like in the background, but I'm not practicing them. I'm maybe doing a little bit of mental science because I still do visualization and stuff like that. But yeah, so that's a little bit of an overview, I guess, of my sort of experience with world religion, philosophy. And one of the other things I'm starting to think about now is I'm starting to become interested in Stoicism. I think I'm already pretty stoic. I'm a pretty stoic individual. But yeah, that's something I want to start maybe looking into a little bit more. And yeah. So for now, with me right now, I still have even though I'm practicing mostly Buddhism right now, I still have an issue with calling myself a Buddhist. And because I'm still in an exploratory phase, I like to explore these practices, and and I like to sort of study other philosophies alongside it as well. So some of the key things, I think the reason why is because your own life is unique and it's individual to you. So not every spiritual system is going to be best fit for you. Do you know what I'm saying? And even now with like Buddhism and stuff like that, some of the things I still find a little difficult because of my sort of Western upbringing, if you will. So it's very hard to attach myself to a spiritual system and say, this is the type of spiritual person that I am. I just dip in and I explore and I pull things out, and I'm almost trying to develop my own philosophy in a way, for my own individual life. And I think that's a good idea, to be honest. Some of the key things that I've definitely noticed throughout, so if you study all of these different spiritual systems, you'll notice like common themes. I'm much more interested in similarities about them than differences, and I think that's what's unique about my perspective, and it's what's allowed me to sort of get deeper and deeper and deeper into it and find some of these key truths. I'm looking for the similarities. How do these relate, as opposed to how are these different? And ultimately, it's really about a battle between good and evil. A lot of the spiritual systems talk about good and evil, and the idea is you want to be on the right side instead of the wrong side. A lot of them also talk about, you know, the answers are within you as opposed to without of you. And that kind of makes sense because you can't experience anything outside of you. All of your thoughts, all of your feelings, all of your sensations that you experience, they're all internal. And therefore, anything that happens outside of you shouldn't let that control you. You know, you're being controlled from the outside in as opposed to controlling from the inside out. And that's what all of the spiritual systems teach as well. And one of the other principles that I noticed is discipline. Every single spiritual system talks about the need to uphold discipline and have self-control. And you can even see in that code that I'm following, it's called the Layman's Code of Discipline. And yeah, it's definitely a theme that you would notice throughout. You have to sort of commit yourself to it and, you know, have discipline, stick to it long term, and you'll reap the rewards. So yes, guys, that's enough for today, I think. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it if you watched this video all the way through. I think it would be a good idea to get a little bit more deeper. See what this video does, it opens up now me being able to talk about each individual philosophy and maybe individual books, because I have a ton of books that I can sort of maybe do videos on individual books, you know, about different spiritual systems, because I think I find some of the best books that you can possibly get. And it will just allow me to get into more, you know, rather than talking about the whole thing, getting into more of the parts and explaining all of the individual practices and all of the individual philosophies and stuff like that. So yeah, I really appreciate you watching this video. So yes, see you later, guys. My name is Jason Ankin. This is my vlog channel, and I will see you later. Bye.